This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session 108 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined me for the podcast. If this is your first time to get to the podcast or join us here at the Practice of Therapy, glad you're here. Glad you found us. Hopefully you're going to find the information in this podcast and in previous episodes helpful for you in growing and building your private practice. And for those of you that are returning, welcome back. Glad you're here. Glad you're with me on this journey. And hopefully you subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So this morning I was getting my car serviced, and I was just sitting in their waiting area. They had a pretty good Wi-Fi connection and pretty comfortable place to work, and was just going through catching up on emails and that sort of thing, and started looking at my planner. And one of the things about the planner that I use, and you've heard me mention it here on the podcast before, the Full Focus Planner, is at the very front of the planner there is a place to write out your annual goals. And so I started looking over my annual goals and feeling good about some of them, and then some of them I didn't feel so good about. There were several where I had written them out and I'd already met those goals for the year. And I heard somewhere one time that if you write down a goal, there's like a 40% better chance of reaching that goal just by writing it out. And so I was just looking at those and just thinking about the year. December, in particular for me at least, it's just a real transitional time. The year is winding down, and so we're beginning to think about year-end things, which is what we're going to be talking a little bit about in this podcast episode with Julie Harris, and I'll get to her here in a minute to tell you a little bit about our thinking around this. But anyway, also just, preparing for the holidays and all that goes with that. It's just a whole different feel to the year, wintertime being here and the cooler air. And we've already had a little bit of snow here in East Tennessee. And so it's just a real transitional time, at least in my mind. But anyway, one of the things about the end of the year that we have to really be prepared for is just tax season. And so that's what Julie and I are going to be talking about. And depending on when you're listening to this podcast, and I mentioned this last week, is that we've got a free webinar coming up on December the 11th. And I know that when this podcast episode comes out on the 9th, it's going to be a real short time to get registered for that. But do register for it, whether you're before or after the actual live webinar is. It'll be at December 11th at 12:30 Eastern Time. And if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/tax webinar, you can sign up to get that webinar. And what we're doing in this webinar, again, I'm teaming with Julie Harris from GreenOak Accounting, and we're just going to be talking about the things that you need to be thinking about in terms of taxes and just being prepared for tax season. Because believe it or not, folks, it's going to be here before we know it. For those of us in the United States, April the 15th is the tax filing deadline. But you don't want to wait till April the 14th to do this stuff. And so Julie and I are going to be talking about all the things that you need to know. Well, not all the things, but most of the things you need to know around preparing for tax season and ways that you can maybe take the stress out of it. So anyway, just commend that to you. practiceoftherapy.com/tax webinar. The other thing I want to mention to folks, and this kind of ties in with the tax webinar, is that we've got a course out there, and for those of you that have been listening to the podcast a while, you know about this, but we've got Julie and I teamed up, and we put together a full online course called Money Matters in Private Practice. And the course teaches you all the things you need to know about the financial side of private practice. For most of us in graduate school, we learned very little to nothing about the business side of private practice, and in particular, just the whole financial side of private practice. And the number one reason that private practices will fail is they're just not, they don't have their numbers right. They aren't prepared financially for private practice. So this course teaches you all of that. It's, over 6 hours of instruction from me and Julie around the financial side of private practice, from basic accounting to knowing how to set your fees, to keeping your books, to there's a big part of the course teaches you about Profit First. Again, a big book that I recommend by Mike McAllowitz. So all of that is included in the course. And so you can find out more about that if you go over to practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. And also sign up for the tax webinar. It's a free webinar, and you can, we'll hit, we'll hit some highlights of some of the things that are included in the course anyway. The course, of course, goes into more detail. But anyway, I'd love for you to find out more about that. And the other thing I'll mention here just about the resources that I have at the Practice of Therapy, I've got a whole resources page there. And if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com and just click on the link there near the top of the page that just says cool resources, I've just got a whole lot of different things that are have available to people, and also recommend just other products and services that I either use in my own practice or I know come highly recommended. So I just commend that to you, just to know that those resources are there. And plus, I've got a lot of free resources on the website. The big one being the Private Practice Startup Guide. If you haven't gotten that yet, I invite you to go over and download that for yourself. I just updated it last month, and so it's got some additional information from the older version, and just want to commend that to you as a gift for me, just to for listening to the podcast and just signing up to receive emails from me and just updates and notifications of different things that come down the pike that I think will be helpful for you in your practice. So anyway, just wanted to commend that to everyone. So in today's episode, as I mentioned, Julie Harris and I are going to be talking about preparing for tax season. And so without further ado, here's my good friend Julie Harris from GreenOak Accounting. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I'm so happy to have with me again today my good friend Julie Harris. Welcome back, Julie.
Hi, Gordon. Good to be here.
Yeah, that Julie's getting to be an old hat at this, and because we've done so much fun stuff together just around the business side of private practice, and the course that we've worked on together, the Money Matters in Private Practice course. And so I realized that as we were getting ready to do our next webinar, that this would be a great time to have Julie back on the podcast. Julie and I are going to be doing a webinar on December, depending on when you're listening to this episode, but it's going to be on December the 11th at 12:30, and it's a free webinar on preparing for tax season. But in today's episode, I wanted to talk with Julie about that because it's going to be here before we know it, folks, and I just want you to make sure you're ready for that. So, Julie, for those that don't know you already, tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is Julie Harris. I'm the owner of GreenOak Accounting. We are an accounting firm that specializes in working with private practice owners, both solo and groups, throughout the United States. And we provide monthly accounting services. We do Profit First. We do tax services as well. So all of your accounting needs can be met in one spot. And Gordon and I have been talking a lot about year end and getting ready for tax season. So I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yes. I'm sorry. And again, Julie's one of my good friends, and so it's always fun to have her here. As Julie and I were chatting before we started recording, one of the things that I think can be real intimidating for people, especially for those that are new to going into private practice, is really kind of understanding. And we're going to cover this in detail in the webinar. And even if you, I'll say this real quick, just as a side note, even if you were past the date of the webinar, be sure and sign up for it anyway. And that way you can get access to a recording of it. So we'll be recording the webinar. But one of the things that I think is real intimidating to people is when they go into business for themselves, they don't realize the tax implications of that. And just the big one being the difference between being self-employed versus being employed by someone. So, Julie, you want to talk just a little bit about that? I know, again, we're going to cover a lot of this in the webinar, but.
Yeah, well, first, I think being a business owner is one of the greatest opportunities, income-wise and tax-wise in America. I really think it's a great place for small business. So, but there's a big difference between being an employee and being a business owner, and that a lot of that has to do with mindset, but a lot of it has to do with taxes too, and how when you're an employee, you're going to get a W-2 at the end of the year or a 1099 if you're a contractor. But most of the, a lot of the work is done already for you. But when you're a business owner, there's a lot of items that you can deduct. And that, that's one of the great tax savings opportunities, but you have to really keep good track of what's going on in your business so you can have solid records for yourself, for your tax preparer, but also for the IRS if they ever come knocking for an audit. So you want to have records of what has happened in your business.
Right. And Julie, you and I were talking about some of the kind of the horror stories that have happened to people where they might be get to the end of the year and they start to file their taxes and realize, oh my gosh, I owe so much money to the IRS.
Big surprises. Yeah. So there's two main ways that you pay taxes as a business owner. And one is going to be self-employment tax, and that's FICA, so Social Security and Medicare. As a self-employed person, you're paying both the employee and the employer portion of that. So when you're an employee and as a W-2, you're paying only the employee portion. Your employer is paying the other half. And together, those add up to be about 15.3% of your pay. So when you're self-employed, you're paying that. You're paying self-employment tax, but you're also paying federal and state tax if that's applicable in your state. So there's a couple of different ways that you can get taxed, and that often will come as a surprise to folks.
Right. And that's a big thing. I know back when I was, I've changed my business model last year. So now that all the people that work for me in my group practice are W-2 people. So I, as their employer, I pay half of their FICA, which is the Medicare and the Social Security portion of the income tax that we have to pay. Everybody has to pay regardless. But one of the things that was always a surprise to people, and I tried to warn them for this, with when they were a contractor, they were still responsible for 100% of that. And so again, it's not to confuse people, but you do have to pay that as a self-employed person, have to pay that quarterly, or at least pay it in advance from the previous year. So there's a couple of ways to do that. So
and this might be a discussion for another day, but that's also one of the reasons where typically a W-2 employee is going to be paid a little bit less than a contractor, because the employer is also paying, an extra 8%. Of 7 and some change of self-employment tax.
Right.
A topic for another.
Yeah. And we go into detail about all of that in the Money Matters for Private Practice course that we have out there. And you can get that on, Julie has links and I have links both to that. But One of the things that I think is probably what people are maybe at this stage of the game, here we are mid-December, and most of us, the holidays and buying gifts and getting ready for that is kind of in the forefront. I know it is for me, but also as soon as January 1 rolls around, we need to start getting prepared for tax season. And one of the things that I know that Julie and I had talked about is, how do you figure out, if you've not hired someone to work with you for your taxes, how do you do that? How do you find the right person for your business, but also being able to decide whether it might be something you want to tackle just on your own? So you want to talk a little bit about that, Julie? I know that's a very broad topic, and we're going to cover some of this on the webinar, but you want to hit on that for us?
Sure. Well, so I think sometimes it's the right decision for you to DIY your taxes, right? And that often comes up if you've got a simple tax situation, if you really just started your business and there's minimal income and expenses, or if you really feel comfortable with your numbers and with preparing that, right? So for some business owners, that's the right decision. I would say probably most business owners, that's not something that they feel particularly comfortable with. They're not comfortable with the risk involved with doing it themselves, and that uncertainty of knowing if you did the right thing or if you're doing things correctly. And so they decide to outsource it. And certainly if you've got a more complex business structure, like a partnership, an S Corp, a C Corp, typically you're going to want to outsource that because it's a separate form. There's some basis items that we need to track. So most of the time you're going to want to find someone to do that. And really, this is the perfect time of year to identify the person that you want to work with. All accounting professionals, really come January 1, we're going to start getting very, very busy. So if you want to have those discovery calls and find out if someone is the right fit for you, this is a perfect time to do it. And you were asking also, how to find someone that is the right fit for you. And I like Dave Ramsey's approach here, where you want to find someone who's got the heart of a teacher. Most therapists don't have any kind of accounting formal education or minimal knowledge. And so there's a lot of stress that comes around the finances. So I would love for you to find someone who is going to not make you feel like you've asked the wrong question, who's not going to be impatient with you when you ask clarification on your tax return or on your books or what's going on. I want someone who's going to be happy to answer the questions that you have when you reach out to them, and that's going to be responsive. So find someone that you trust, find someone that you can have that ongoing relationship with, and that's going to make you feel really comfortable with the numbers in your business.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other thing that we talked about is, I know that when you're searching for an accountant or a bookkeeper, some of them have different requirements about how you develop that, how that relationship is kind of set up.
Right.
And I know you were talking about, just for GreenOak Accounting, Julie, that you guys really like to be very hands-on with people and to be able to just kind of understand the full picture of things, so that they're not just bringing you a shoebox.
A shoebox at the end of the year.
Yeah. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that, just about how you guys do it there to give people?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I made the decision for my firm years ago that we only do tax work when we also do the monthly accounting. So I do that. We set it up that way because it's the best for the client. We have that ongoing relationship where you know us, we know you, we know what's going on in your business, and we're just in a position to be able to advise the business owner year round. When someone's just bringing us a shoebox or bringing us, a spreadsheet at the end of the year, there's so many missed opportunities, and that's just not the best way to serve my clients. So that's just how we've structured it. So we only we'll do taxes when we also do the monthly accounting, and that's something that doesn't always work for everyone, and that's perfectly fine, because there's plenty of tax preparers that are happy to have you just at the end of the year. But that's just one of many considerations to keep in mind when you're looking for the right fit for you.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it's if you think about it, it's no different than what we do as therapists, in that we want to be able to develop a relationship with our clients, and that's really where that trust comes, and where that where we can be most effective. And I think when it comes to money, it's such a personal thing for people to be able to find someone that you trust, somebody that you can share those details with, just like we do, like clients do with us and in the therapy room. And it's it's not emotional issues, but it's finances, but that feels emotional at times.
Yeah, and there's a lot of vulnerability too with just sharing all the nitty gritty of your finances with someone.
Right.
And there has to be that trust relationship as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the other thing too, and we hit on this a good bit in the Money Matters course, is just this whole thing around money shame. I think a lot of times people kind of hold back because they're either embarrassed by their financial situation, or they worry that they're going to be compared to somebody else that maybe they view as more successful, or that sort of thing. And I think that's something that we really need to really try to dismiss, those inaccurate thoughts about hiring someone to help you with your taxes and finances.
When someone works with us at GreenOak Accounting, there's no shame, right? So there's no judgment. But where we're able to help is because we see so many different practices and what works and what doesn't. We've seen the habits of successful practice owners in the million plus. We're able to share that information with you. So it's not like we're shaming you for what you've done. We're just able to offer that much more perspective and assistance based on just the information that we know.
Right. And that's, that this could, again, like you said earlier, Julie, we don't have the time to go into it in detail in this podcast. But one of the things that was just so exciting for me when I started getting to know Julie and learning about what she does is she's come up with what she calls the ratios for success. And it's really kind of tied to the concepts around profit first, and just being able to look at things in terms of percentages and just where you should be based on Julie's experience, years of experience with hundreds of other therapists, of knowing which practices are financially successful and those that are maybe not as successful. So, just looking at those percentages of knowing where, is your practice doing well or not financially? You want to say just maybe a little bit about that, Julie, just when you, in looking at all of that. I mean, and it very much ties into the taxes as well.
Sure. Well, so my team and I have developed ratios based on the years of experience, and also, so the ratios are different for solo practice owners and group practices, just because that landscape looks very different. But what we're able to do because of those ratios is put together a plan of action. So just last week, we started working with a group practice owner that has a cash flow crunch, where it really just feels like there's never any cash. And once we put together, first there were no books, so we put together the books. And then we realized that her profit margin is right around 8%. And that's really, really, really tight, because that profit margin is how she's paying herself, how she's paying taxes, and profit. So there's just not a lot left for her at the end of the month. And that's, the point of a group practice is obviously to be able to help more people, right? You're able to expand your reach, but it's also to make money. You shouldn't be making less money as a group practice owner than as a solo practice owner, right? So you shouldn't be working more hours to subsidize the hours that your therapists are working. So the good thing is now we have a plan of action, and we can have some discussions around how we're going to change the situation here and increase that profit margin.
Right, right. And that's and that just reminds me, that was exactly the situation I was in a couple of years ago, where when I really understood my numbers and really started working with my accountant and that sort of thing, of understanding, where the money was coming from, where it was going. I realized that I was having to pay my therapist out of part of what I made in my sessions, where it should be covering, they should be covering their own expenses with all of that. And
And
that's,
then some. They should be covering their
yeah,
expenses and then with
yes,
profit for
right.
you.
And so
Yeah.
it caused me to change the whole way in which I do my business now, and just really prepare each year for things. One thing I think maybe it's important to do too, Julie, and this ties into taxes to some degree, but I think the end of the year is really a good time to kind of analyze your data, in terms of really understanding, okay, these are the areas maybe where I can cut some expenses. These are areas where I could maybe increase um, my profitability, whether, do I need to raise my fees? Do I need to look at maybe getting rid of the insurance panels that are not really producing for us, and those kinds of things. And again, I think by working with an accountant and working with an expert on all of this, but I think it's also important to be knowledgeable yourself about all of this, which is why we put together that whole course, the Money Matters in Private Practice, just to kind of teach you those things. So, well, any other maybe? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So this time of year, I just wanted to share a story. This time of year, we see a lot of practice owners that really haven't done, they're not aware of their financial situation for the year, and they're starting to get nervous about it, right? So they'll call and say, I don't have any books. I'm not using a system. I don't really know what's going on. It feels like I have no money, right? And that's kind of where a lot of surprises can happen. So whether you're doing it yourself, getting your own QuickBooks account and setting that up, doing it in a spreadsheet, there's tremendous power in having your numbers and knowing what those are. And because it can help you avoid some big surprises when you do your taxes. And I'll tell you one story of a business owner whose practice had been really growing slowly but surely. But then there wasn't a tight control on the funds, right? So there was a lot of personal expenses going through the business account. There were trips. Like, it just seemed like there was more money for a while, and then that money would get spent, and then there was no money again for payroll. And so what happens when you don't have good systems and you don't have a good sense of what's going on is we got to the end of the year, and started working with that business owner, and it turns out they had had a very good year, and they had made about $250,000 that year. So that's a great cause for celebration. However, there was no money left. It had happened so slowly, that increase, that they really didn't realize it and had spent most of it. So that resulted in this gigantic tax bill, and there was no money left to pay for it. So we had to put them on negotiate a payment plan with the IRS. So I'm giving this as a cautionary tale. It's better to know now than to know in March. So get the numbers together to have a sense of, where am I ending up the year? Because it's very easy when you don't have financial records for the money to just disappear. It slowly gets spent here and there, or it's just this trip, or just this new furniture purchase, or just, and then the next thing you see is that money's just gone, and you haven't saved for taxes at all, and the IRS waits for. So
yeah, and I think that's that I love that story for that reason, and that just looking at your bank account doesn't give you an accurate picture of your financial situation. And so it's so important to be able to have those systems, using your accounting software, and having an accountant and bookkeeper that can make you aware of how you're really doing financially. So, well, Julie, tell folks a little bit more about how they can get in touch with you, and they should, if they've been listening to my podcast at all, they know about GreenOak Accounting. So, but tell folks a little bit more about how they get in touch with you.
Sure. So first, I hope that you'll join us for the webinar on December 11th at 12:30 Eastern. But if you would like to get in touch with GreenOak Accounting, you can visit our website, which is greenoakaccounting.com. And right on the main page, you can schedule some time with someone from our team for a free consultation. There's no cost. We'll just talk about what is going on in your business and see if we might be able to help you. On that page, you can also sign up for 5 days of financial tips for private practice. And there's just tons and tons of information in there as well. And so that's it. We'd love to talk to you.
Great. Well, Julie, as always, great to talk to you. And folks, you'll be hearing more from Julie, I know for sure, in the future. We've got a few more webinars we're starting to plan, and just maybe a little teaser. We're even thinking about a live event. So I'll throw that out there. So thanks, Julie.
Yeah. Thanks, Gordon.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Julie and our conversation around just preparing for tax season. As we said, it's going to be here before we know it. And one of the things you don't want to do is just wait to the last minute to start getting things together. And even if you feel like you haven't done a good job over the past year of just being ready for tax season, go ahead and take the time now to start getting ready for that. And we'd love to have you join us for the free webinar that is coming up on creating a stress-free tax season for yourself. And if you can just go over to practiceoftherapy.com/tax webinar and sign up for that. Even if you're listening to this and we're past the actual webinar date, which is December 11th, 2019, go ahead and sign up for that, and you can get access to the replay of that after the fact. So hope you can join us. The advantage to joining the live webinar is that you get to ask questions. And so join us for that. That's coming up. And thanks again to Julie Harris for joining me. Julie and her company, GreenOak Accounting, are one of the sponsors for the podcast, and I'm so glad I've been able to collaborate with her. And so you can check them out at GreenOakAccounting.com. And also be sure and check out our other sponsor for the podcast, TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. They are the premier electronic health record system that's out there for mental health practitioners. They're who I use in my practice, and I couldn't do without them. It's just one of those tools that just will make your life so much more easy and really give you a professional edge in your practice. So be sure and check them out, TherapyNotes.com. And if you'll use the coupon code Gordon, just GORDON, you can get 2 months of their services for free. And I'll quickly mention again, just be sure and check out all the other resources that you can find at practiceoftherapy.com, and look forward to hearing from you. So, well, folks, this is it. So have a good rest of your week or weekend whenever you might be listening to the podcast, and do take time to subscribe to the podcast. My tongue's getting tied. Subscribe wherever you might be listening to the podcast, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, just to name a few. You can find us there. So subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Love getting honest feedback from folks. So take care, folks. Hope you have a good rest of your week. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.